Star Wars 7x7, episode 2170. Today we resume our discussion of Queen's Peril. That's the prequel novel to Queen's Shadow by E.K. Johnston. And E.K. Johnston does something rather remarkable in this book, which is double down on the whole taxation of trade routes business. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So, back to Queen's Peril, the novel by E.K. Johnston that serves as a prequel to Queen's Shadow and details the early days of Padmé's queenship prior to and then including the events of the Phantom Menace. Now, cast your mind back, if you will, to those heady days in 1999 prior to the release of the Phantom Menace, when there was a cover story from Vanity Fair, and it included the opening crawl from the Phantom Menace. That's the one that actually starts off with the taxation of trade routes being in dispute. And people were kind of going, huh? Like, this is how the prequels are starting with the taxation of trade routes? That's weird. And as I've said on the podcast in the past, I don't have any problem with that being the way into the story. And in fact, that takes place off screen anyway. So when the Phantom Menace starts, you jump right into the blockade of Naboo and the action with the Jedi. So, I mean, really, everything's fine with that. I have not had a problem with it whatsoever. It's not one of the reasons that, I have an issue with the Phantom Menace or anything like that. So that's that. So imagine my surprise when I read Queen's Peril and E.K. Johnston actually goes into the whole taxation of trade routes business and makes that part of the plot of the first 2/3 of the book. And I suppose this is a reasonable point at which to say mild spoilers follow for Queen's Peril. So if you haven't read it yet and you don't want it spoiled for you, then, there's your fair warning. So there are scenes that involve taxation-related stuff. Like, for example, Senator Palpatine reading a copy of a bill that had taxation stuff in it and how he was going to vote in it and whether things that he wanted to see inserted in there had been inserted in there, and the fact that he had multiple bills written that would be introduced subsequently because this was a whole plan to do one tax bill and then another tax bill and then another tax bill, and it was all political maneuvering that he had in mind. So first of all, that was pretty amazing. Second of all, there is a scene that features Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, and it feels like it's a sibling, if you will, to the scenes in Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray, where Obi-Wan Kenobi is being tasked with doing some very boring research and doesn't understand why this is stuff of interest to Qui-Gon Jinn. Everybody else is doing really exciting things as Padawan apprentices, and he is absolutely not getting to do that. Clearly, his time will come, but for now, they're actually reading about taxation bills as well. Like, they're sitting in the library and Obi-Wan thinks to himself, there are a lot of people with too much time on their hands, or at least this is what he says to Qui-Gon. There are too many people with too much time on their hands, and I don't understand why this is such a big deal, and by implication also, why are you even interested in it? And Qui-Gon says, we're going to be ready when the time comes, and this is just some feeling that Qui-Gon has that he wants to start reading into some of this stuff. And they have a conversation about control and about politicians and about how, this particular tax bill is possibly driving a wedge between the planets and the corporations that trade with them. And still later, there's a conversation that happens with Chancellor Valorum and Senator Palpatine, and Valorum is reflecting on his outdated ideas about how corporations should be represented, or rather should not be represented, in the Senate. Apparently, it is a commonly accepted idea in the galaxy that a person's employer should have representation in the Galactic Senate, whereas he doesn't believe that that's the case. He actually believes that it should just be people represented. But ultimately, the reason why the blockade happens is because Darth Sidious realizes that he has to advance his timetable because of Queen Amidala. Amidala was preceded by a queen who had a more isolationist policy. Her planet was not staying connected with other planets in the sector. And Padme, one of the first things she wanted to do was to reestablish relations with these other planets, find out what their, challenges and concerns were. And she said, she didn't necessarily think that she could solve them all immediately, but wanted to have a summit where she started talking about their particular goals and interests and challenges, and at least start to put some of these things out on the table and start to repair relationships. And it actually worked. A dialogue began, and things weren't necessarily solved, but there was actually positive forward motion in relationships being rebuilt. And Captain Panaka, who had a convivial relationship with Sheev Palpatine, was reporting this back and saying, yeah, it was pretty amazing, I can't believe it. And Palpatine was like, wow, yeah, that sounds like it's pretty amazing. And then secretly, as Darth Sidious, he's like, grrr, I should not have missed that coming, right? This was the one time that Padme would ever surprise him, at least this is what he was saying to himself, and realized at that point that he needed to start advancing things a lot faster with the whole Trade Federation blockade and whatnot. And so there you go, a brief summary of E.K. Johnston doubling down on taxation as the issue that drives the events of the Phantom Menace, or drives the events leading up to the Phantom Menace, and all of the political and diplomatic machinations that happen around that. That was very cool in my own personal estimation. And that is going to be it for the show today. Thank you so much for joining me for it. As always, please keep yourselves safe. Please keep your loved ones and your community safe as well. Take care of yourselves. Remember that Black lives do matter. And may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
Is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox. It is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other related Star Wars items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2019 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.